Hello and welcome. Before I start, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the All-Ireland Conference of Undergraduate Research organisers for allowing me this opportunity to present my research proposal here today. I would also like to thank my supervisor, Dara Bradshaw, for all his help. So I'm going to begin by introducing myself. My name is Lynn Fenton. I am a fourth year psychology and sociology undergrad. I am conducting this research as part of my final year project under the supervision of Dara Bradshaw, who specialises in the area of developmental psychology. I will be presenting a research proposal today. I will not be presenting findings at this point. Final data will be available on the 21st of April. So the title of my research project is The Impact of Early Stressful Life Events and the Mediating Role of Group Membership and Social Connections on Psychological Outcomes in Adolescence. But before I get into that, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what my presentation will entail today. So I'm going to begin by giving some background to my research. I will then speak about my research study, and I will conclude with some potential implications for my anticipated findings. So some background to begin. I will be conducting research in the area of developmental psychology. I will be specifically looking at the developmental period of early childhood through to adolescence and their exposure to stressful life events during this time, which have been noted to have detrimental impacts in later life. It is no surprise that there is a growing body of literature that has concluded that the exposure of stressful life events during childhood is associated with numerous health, psychiatric and behavioural problems in adolescence and adulthood. Stressful life events are also noted to impact cognitive, emotional, social and behavioural development. So stressful life events. What are stressful life events? Stressful life events during childhood are any potentially traumatic event that occurs in childhood. They include sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, parental incarceration, witnessing domestic violence, parental mental health illness, parental separation and divorce, and household alcohol and drug problems. Stressful life events are noted to have a cumulative effect. So the more stressful life events one is subject to, the more adverse consequences they will experience in later life. Also, it's worth noting that lower socioeconomic groups tend to be exposed to a greater amount of stressful life events. This is important as the data set which I will be using is the Fragile Families data set, and that predominantly investigates the lives of those in lower socioeconomic groups. I'll discuss more of that later. So the negative outcomes of stressful life events include drug and alcohol dependence in later life, suicide, involvement in abusive relationships down the line, mental health illness, learning and behavioural disorders, as well as homelessness and general poor health. However, mechanisms through which disadvantage are transmitted are poorly understood. So we know stressful life events have negative impacts in later life. However, the reason why is poorly understood, and how this is transmitted is also poorly understood. My research will be focusing on how this is transmitted. One potential pathway through which the outcomes are transmitted is social identity. So the social identity theory was developed by Tefel and Turner in the late 1970s. It suggests that a person's sense of self is derived from their group membership. And as well as social identity, self-esteem and connectedness are also associated with group membership. Tefel and Turner suggests three mental processes are involved in evaluating one's social identity. They are social categorization, social identification, and social comparison. So social categorization refers to an individual's access to their identity through the categorization process. This can be done based on their in-group or the being member of an out-group. Those in an in-group are individuals with shared characteristics, and outcomes tend to be typically more positive of those members who are part of the in-group. Whereas out-group members can be defined as people who don't specifically share characteristics of a said in-group, and the outcomes of being a member of an out-group tend to be typically more negative. Social identification, then, it refers to attributing one's identity to a perceived membership in a relevant group, as I've said. And social comparison is evaluating one's own group or oneself by comparing them to others. But I will be predominantly focusing on the social categorization and social identification. Social identity theorists argue that group membership can foster a sense of connection and belonging, which can potentially counteract the negative consequences of stigmatization, which is associated with being exposed to a stressful life event in childhood. Group membership can also act as a gateway. By maintaining group membership, they can lead on to new groups in the future and establish a behaviour of creating and maintaining social connections in the future, which could help buffer the negative effects of stressful life events. So group membership as a negative. Following a stressful life event, one can acquire a potentially stigmatized identity. This affects their group membership, as stigmatization can lead to social isolation, which reduces access to groups. Particularly valued group membership is compromised. So social connections, sense of belonging, and opportunities to access support, which come with being members of a valued group, are then undermined, and this can lead to negative outcomes. This would be in line with the social curse ideology. Group membership can also act as a positive, though. So following a stressful life event, those who are able to maintain or extend their group-based connections are able to access psychological resources which protect themselves against those negative outcomes, and lead to the buffering of the negative outcomes. And this is in line with the social cure ideology. However, this pathway is under-researched. So hence, I will be attempting to bridge this gap in conducting my research. So my research, as I mentioned, will be using the Fragile Families dataset, and I aim to explore the association between stressful life events and negative outcomes can be buffered by group membership and perceived social support. So the data for this analysis was taken from the Fragile Family Child and Wellbeing Study, as I mentioned. This is a population-based longitudinal birth cohort study. It contains 6 waves of data collected and comprises of over 4,000 parent-child dyads and from 20 US cities between the years of 1998 and 2002. So baseline interviews were conducted primarily in hospitals straight after a child's birth, and then follow-up interviews were conducted 1, 3, 5, 9, and 15 years after. My investigation will be only using 3 of those waves, wave 4, 5, and 6. So the variables which I will be using for my study, stressful life events will be my independent variable. Perceived connections and group membership will act as my mediators, and psychological outcomes will be my dependent variable. I will be conducting a serial mediation using process model 6. I have computed variables using syntax. This was quite a lengthy and at times tedious process, but I have successfully created 4 comprehensive variables, which I will use in my analysis. So a visual representation of my proposed pathway of investigation looks like this. So early childhood stressful life events will be measured at age 5. I'll be measuring 10 different stressful life events based on Felity's research. I will then be looking at group membership at age 9 and perceived social connections at age 9, and I will be looking at the psychological outcomes at age 15 using the child behavioral checklist. So my independent variable, as I mentioned, is stressful life events, and that will be comprised of 10 different childhood adversities. A cumulative score was created by summing those 10 categories together. Participants were marked as having experienced 1, 2, 3, or 4 or more stressful life events. And as I mentioned earlier, those who are subject to more stressful life events are likely to have greater negative outcomes. And I chose to measure this to measure stressful life events at age 5 because Lemmings and Grube's systematic review uncovered a gap in current literature. They found that predominantly stressful life events are investigated between the ages of 0 to 3. However, exposure to stressful life events from ages 3 to 6 are much less. There's much less information on those. So my mediating variable is group membership, and that the representation of group membership was informed by the Beadleson study. It calculated the total number of group activities each child was involved in, and it was measured at age 9. The second mediator will be social connections, and that will use the social connectedness at school scale, and that will also be measured at age 9. And then control variables will be socio-demographically informed, and they will comprise of the child's gender, mother's age, ethnicity, and immigration status. My dependent variable is psychological outcomes, and that will be measured using the child behavioral checklist, which is comprised of both internalizing and externalizing subscales, and that will be measured in adolescence at age 15. So results from this investigation can be used to support the most vulnerable children in our society through prevention, so attempting to decrease exposure to childhood adversities, especially among extremely fragile populations, such as those who were investigated in the fragile family data set, those in lower socioeconomic groups, ethnic minorities, and so on. And this can be done through improved policies, as well as through intervention, so through improved practices, such as specialised early childhood teacher training to identify potentially vulnerable children, and also the promotion of group-based activities could be implemented as part of the educational system in efforts to reduce the adversities of being subject to being exposed to a stressful life event in childhood. Future research could also source a more descriptive data set, which would allow for the investigation of identification rather than just association. That is all from me. right now. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I would be more than happy to answer any questions you may have, and any feedback is greatly welcomed. I've left my student mail below. But thank you very much, and goodbye.